Okay, welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to part 2 of a video that I entitled Cognitive Warfare on Young Black Men in America. Let me start off by saying that we all should become very familiar with the term cognitive warfare. As I have shown in the previous video, that this is not a new concept, okay? It has been a concept of the U.S. government, the racist U.S. government, the racist police, predator departments, the racist security agencies as the CIA and the DOD and so forth, the racist military industrial complex, every aspect of white supremacy, every sector, every industry, every institution, every community, including communities where black people live. So let me just read this. As you guys see here on the screen, it says cognitive warfare, all right, influence not only the targeted individual, influences not only what targeted individuals think, but also the way they think and ultimately the way they act. This is for Major General Felipe Canto Chico. Again, I'd like to read you guys another definition of cognitive warfare and its concept. All right, this comes from a cognitive warfare document by the Royal Netherlands Navy, okay, which is part of NATO. This is the NATO Joint Warfare Center, okay. All right, so again, and this is by Commander Cornelius van der Klout, Royal Netherlands Navy, and the subject matter expert. He's a subject matter expert, strategic communications and information operations of the NATO Joint Warfare Center. Okay. Again, you have to look at sources outside of the U.S. to get an idea, okay, or knowledge as to what is taking place in the field of warfare, whether it be psychological warfare, economic warfare, societal warfare, military warfare, and so forth. Okay. So the concept of, or what is called the cognitive warfare concept, is a means to engage more effectively, ensure preparedness, and in doing so maintain credibility and deterrence capability against adversaries across all domains of warfare. This article will describe what cognitive warfare is and why it is important to NATO. Now, remember when I say, right, that the U.S. government, its military security agencies, its law enforcement agencies have been conducting experiments on black people, particularly black people, with an emphasis on black men and black boys. Okay. Now they have shifted somewhat to black women and black girls. All right. We must pay attention to this. Okay. So why does it matter that we know about cognitive warfare? Okay. Cognitive warfare is a structured and well-considered approach to target the human cognitions of individuals, groups, and society in a way that affects their decision-making processes and ultimately their behavior. Okay? While cognitive effects are not measurable in the typical sense, they do affect how we think, how we feel, and how we act using brain-centered technology that aim to destabilize structures, create distrust, and fracture and break social cohesions. For example, through amplifying pre-existing social differences in order to undermine democracies and weaken our rule-based systems. Okay? And I ask the question, why do you think the United States is so good at propaganda? Why do you think the United States is so good at manipulating other countries? Okay? Allied Command Transformation explained cognitive warfare as including activities conducted in synchronization with other instruments of power to affect attitudes and behavior by influencing, protecting, or disrupting individual and group cognition to gain advantage over an adversary. Okay? So we must thoroughly understand all aspects of this warfare against us. Now, a lot of us like to say, well, we're not at war, because we live in our own little bubble that we think is safe. Okay? The vast majority of our people, black people, highly religious, shy away from obtaining knowledge, though the Bible tells them that, my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge because they've become too superstitious and too religious. So they're reading this in their Bible and not once ever thinking logically, intelligently of why does it say that in the Bible. The Bible is one of the greatest tools of propaganda and one of the tools in which white supremacists use to indoctrinate and manipulate the majority of non-white people. We must understand this, as Dr. Ray Higgins says. He who controlled the printed pages controlled the thinking of and for the ages. Okay? When we don't read our history written by our scholars, our historians, our anthropologists, our archaeologists, or read from white scholars or European scholars, Asian scholars, who is more interested in the truth than perpetuating this lie of white supremacy. They too are attacked by the powers that be. Okay? So, I just wanted to read that just to give you guys a sense of awareness as to how this has been going on within the black community for decades and how we have been conditioned to ignore these things, even more so today. We have less young people engaging in civil rights activities. And you see the picture here of the Black Panther, the new Black Panther movement. This is a picture that I got copyright free off of the website. What's the name of the website? Anyway, I forgot the name of the website. But this is what they fear. Okay? This is what they fear. They fear black people with knowledge, black people who are intelligent, black people who have a militaristic way of thinking and mindset, black people who love themselves and each other, black people who believe in self-reliance, black people who believe in knowing and understand, not believe, but black people who know and understand that we need each other in order to move our people forward. So when they're engaging in this, oh, you need to be by yourself because, how you reach a higher level of consciousness is when you spend time by yourself, when you're by yourself. No, that's part of the propaganda campaign, and we have brought into that. Okay? This is why we are more separated today than any other time in our history. This is why people can come into our communities, the community that we live in, okay, push us out, right? And there is no pushback on the part of black people, of us. Not understanding that our displacement by these racist people is an act of violence against us. But we don't see it as part of warfare. We don't see it as part of a deliberate attempt to further push us down to the bottom of society even more. We don't see that. Right? We lack the knowledge because we are too religious. We are too superstitious. We think that God is the only one that is controlling our minds. And I'm here to tell you, God ain't controlling your mind. It is those that are in power, that have the technology, the resources, the money, the ability to create weapons in which it isn't in the form of a bullet, okay, or a bomb. This is in the form of propaganda, psychological manipulation, covert technology based on the radio wave or microwave frequency spectrum, because they've been studying the brain for well over 70 years. Even longer than that, 100 years. But we refuse to not see it. And I understand why we refuse to not see it and can't see it, because I always say it's like when the hypnotist hypnotizes somebody. And the hypnotist asks the person for, an item, an ID, a wallet, a watch, their shoes, you know what I'm saying? Right? An earring or something. And the hypnotist says, well, this ID with your picture on it, this is not you. This is somebody else's name. This is somebody else who looks like you. And you see the person saying, well, that looks like me, but that's not my name, because the hypnotist had manipulated the individual's mind into believing that he's different. That even though he looks like this person, but his name is different, right? And we see these things and we don't think that these things are not being done to us. Okay? And it didn't start now. It did not start now. One of the ways in which they will use to manipulate us is also through drugs. Crack. I talk about the crack cocaine era. Right? Like I said, you mean to tell me some, high school dropout kid, right, suddenly decide that he's going to become a chemist and develop crack? That taking something as baking soda and mixing it with cocaine, right, boiling it on the stove till it crystallized, that he came up with that? All these drugs within the past 20 years, Molly, whatever, what else? All these drugs that enhance your sexual experience, right? Those drugs gave way to a huge increase in young black men and black women becoming involved with other than heterosexual behaviors, right? So they're now bisexual, they're gay, they're lesbians, right? Because what did they do? They made these drugs popular. They popularized these drugs, right? And the sexual experience, it's so profound and so pleasurable, right, that they lose all their inhibition. So they're having threesomes, foursomes. The guys are having sex with each other. The girls are having sex with each other. They're all having sex with each other. Okay? You guys could go read up about these things. Right? Changing the DNA strand of weed, of marijuana, to give it to give you a more potent high. But what else are they doing? When you smoke these things or you take these things, what is it that they're doing? Particularly if you're a woman, what is that is doing to you, to your eggs, right? That change the DNA structure of your children or change the psychology of the child that you're going to be producing. Okay, we see that within the past 2 decades, the biggest rise of homosexuality, lesbianism, bisexuality is one, the Hispanic community or Hispanic people, and two, black people, black, particularly black boys and black girls. Just like, again, Hispanic young men, young boys, young girls, young women. But then we also see a decline in white people who identify as gay, bisexual, or transgender. But the media will have you believe it's the other way. The media will have you believe that there are more white people in America who identify as such than any other group of people. And that's not true. Because, again, the media is a tool that is used to spread propaganda, right? To shape your perception into however matter it sees fit or they sees fit. And we walk around here with our head in the sky because we're defeated and we think that we're winning because we're God-chosen people. Right? We love the fact that we're suffering in the name of Jesus. And this is why they can come in and they can destroy the next generation of black boys and girls, just like they've done in the past. And they will continue to do so until enough of us, have a level of consciousness that's based on reality and that's based on knowledge and information and truth on our history. Okay, so I don't want to get too long into this talking point that I'm doing here, but I do want to get back into reading what I started in the last video. Okay, cognitive warfare on young black males in America. So this is going to be part 2 of that video. Disproportionate minority contact. These so-called Get Tough laws of the 1990s had by far the harshest impact on youth of color. While social scientists had known for decades that adolescents of color were more likely to be arrested, detained, formally charged in juvenile court, transferred to adult court, and confined to secure residential facilities than their white counterparts, these discrepancies soared during the 1980s and 1990s. Statistics suggest that 4 out of 5 young, hold on a second. 4 out of 5 youth newly held in detention between 1983 and 1997 were juveniles of color. The transfer of juveniles of color to adult court was equally, if not more, disproportionate. A 2000 study, for example, showed that 82% of youth charged in adult court were 18 of the highest jurisdiction in the country were youth of color, and that African American 43% and Latino 37% youth were more likely than white youths, as 26%, to receive a sentence of incarceration. These numbers persist even today. Research suggests that these discrepancies cannot be attributed entirely to crime commission rates. While differential offending contributes to disproportionately let me read this again. Research suggests that these disparities cannot be attributed entirely to crime commission rates. While differential offending distributes to disproportionality, research shows that the statistical differences between the offending patterns of white youth and minority youth are simply not great enough to account for the racial disparities observed at any of the processing points in the juvenile justice system. To date, of the hundreds of multiple regression studies that have been conducted on disparities in juvenile justice, nearly 2/3 have documented a race effect on decision making, which suggests that race neutral criteria cannot by themselves account for the disparities observed in processing outcome. In other words, they are deliberately sending, they were deliberately and still are deliberately sending black and Hispanic youths to jail. When the same offenses are being committed by white juveniles, the white juveniles by far are not being given sentences of incarceration. Okay? In other words, but for the presence of race bias, overrepresentation would not exist in the same degree, to the same degree. The social psychology of social war. Again, this is warfare. Okay? And so if we're not teaching and educating our young people, whether they're our kids or not, we are turning our backs and have turned our backs for the most part on the younger people within the society. Okay? What accounts for the race effects observed in these studies, and more generally, why is it that we as a nation have continued to enact laws and policies that have devastated such a large segment of our adolescent population? You know, there's a document I downloaded. I think I may have two versions of it, but it's these written by these black men who were formerly incarcerated. Some went on to get college degrees in psychology and sociology, and so they did a study, right? And the study was called the brainwashing and manipulation of young black males in the penal system. And I always use the example of the pants sagging. That came out of the prison. And now 2 decades later, most young black children, and including a lot of black men my age, I see walking down the street, still with their pants below their behinds. All right? So how did that happen? How did that take hold in the black community to where something that was done in prison to show that, you know, they wanted to have sex, homosexual sex, have made its way into the black culture, particularly the black hip hop culture? And I always say this, that when white people give us a negative labeling, they're going to do whatever it takes to make us into that label that they give us, that negative labeling, the term super predator. They know what they're doing. They're telling us what they're doing. And because they're very crafty and very psychopathic and sociopathical in their thinking and in the behavior and the relationship when it comes to interacting with black people, it's like the psychopaths. They love to play games. The sociopaths, the dark triads, they make everything into a game. And we, as black people, are the pawns on the chessboard that they can move in any direction. They can take off the leaders within the black community off of the chessboard. All right? And we're running around engaging in things that are overstimulating, right? That are fun, fantasy type, living the boss life, champagne life, all this stuff, to where black women are now the largest buyers of luxury items. How could that be? Black women spend more money on luxury items than even the wealthy people. Okay, and part of it is done through hip hop. They have hijacked hip hop, and they're only pushing a self-destructive message to black youths. So, the social psychology of social war. What accounts for the race effect observed in these studies? And more generally, why is it that we as a nation have continued to enact laws and policies that have devastated such a large segment of our adolescent population? In part, we can blame the social psychology of social war. This part summarizes a wealth of contemporary research that shows that humans react to, interpret, and make decisions about the environment and each other largely from a series of unconscious cognitive association and disassociation. When stimulated or primed, these processes are automatic. You understand this? It says when stimulated or primed, these processes are automatic because we have been programmed subconsciously to behave in a certain way, to think in to not think in a certain way, to believe certain things, right? To tell each other things that are going to be detrimental for us and each other. As Dr. Amos Wilson said, you have to condition black people to be out of their minds. You have to condition them subconsciously with a backwards mentality. And so now they're going to take that backwards programming and teach it to their children. So these things that we do it out of our subconscious mind. Okay? But we have to get our conscious mind to recognize the programming so we can change our subconscious mind. So we can reverse the detrimental conditioning. Okay, so I'm going to read it again. When stimulated or primed, these processes are automatic. They happen whenever we want them to or not. Importantly, several studies conducted over the last decade suggest that the political posturing, media imagery, war rhetoric, and Manichean moralizing associated with the super predator war and with American social war in general have an especially potent effect on this dynamic. These images and ideas influence not only the content of our stereotypes of the enemy, but also the degree of which we rely on those stereotypes. Ultimately, they also influence our willingness to embrace measures that punish and incapacitate the enemy. Right? So when we as black people look in the mirror and we don't love ourselves, we tell each other the lie about how we love ourselves, we like ourselves. We don't really love ourselves. We don't really like ourselves. If we love ourselves, we wouldn't be lightening our skin. If we love ourselves, we would embrace who we are as a people. But we don't. When we look at our children, how they're failing in education, how they become even more and more unruly, how we as adults don't know how to handle conflict with each other, how we would break up our family over the little silliest things and struggle and tell each other that, it's okay to struggle, right? And iron sharpens steel and all this bullshit. White people don't say that. They say that shit in the boardroom. They say that shit when they're competing for clients, right? We say that because of our suffering, because of the harsh life we live. Okay? With no understanding of how detrimental that is to our psychology. But not only to our psychology, but also to our neurological mind. A social cognition theory. Most research suggests that overt racism and conscious discrimination have declined steadily since the 1960s. What persists, however, are unconscious racial stereotypes that are less visible but no less pernicious. To better understand how unsubconscious bias work, a brief primer on social cognition theory is warranted. First of all, there is no such thing as unconscious bias. Okay? And I'm going to tell you why. When what's her name? Jane Elliott did her experiment, and she does it like every 10 years or so. And she puts white people in the room, and she says, how many of you would like to be treated as how black people are treated? And not one white hands go up. What that's telling you is that they consciously know how black people are treated. But now we as black people, now we love to, when white people come up with these terms, we like to give them an out, right? Because again, that's part of our affirmation, our love of whiteness, right? As what Dr. Ray Higgins called Anglophilia, the love of whiteness. So we'll come up with terms like, unconscious bias. Okay, when we know the system is designed the way it is, and that system is designed to uphold white supremacy at the detriment of black people particular. Okay, so I don't believe in I don't not say believe, but I don't follow into that subscribed theory of unconscious bias, unconscious racial stereotypes. How could it be unconscious racial stereotypes when they constantly do things like, you look at Louis Vuitton, you look at some of these luxury brands who are constantly mocking black people in their design, and they do this every couple of years to see if our attitudes have changed enough that we won't say anything. Right? White people are meticulous enough to know that they are continuing to manipulate our subconscious, so that we will accept these things in the future. Right? So when every couple of years they do things like this, is to gauge the amount of black people and white people who are going to be upset and call them out on their racism. In the effort to cope with what would otherwise be an overwhelming environment, humans unconsciously engage in a series of complex cognitive processes that enable us to pause and react quickly to incoming information. Well, we're not seeing that today, right? In 2024, we're not seeing that. What we see is the sharp decline in our cognitive abilities. With the pandemic worsened it. How many of us are reading the studies done on the pandemic? How many of us are studying the research paper that says that people who have the COVID-19, right? That when they study their brain, when they did an MRI of their brain, it shows that their brain have aged at least 10 to 20 years. How many of you know that? So when we're walking around thinking that, oh yeah, we survived COVID, if I get it, what have you. We're not looking at the long-term effect of this. And understand that the pandemic was a biological warfare on non-white people. How many of you knew that 18 million people died from COVID-19? How many of you know that there are hundreds of thousands of people that are negatively affected by COVID-19? Lost their taste, lost their sense of smell, right? Have what they call extreme fatigue syndrome. That's what they developed. All right. Slower motor skills. The deterioration of certain organs in our bodies, our lung, our liver, our kidney. See, these are the things that we should be looking into and reading about. We have to become an informed people. Like, if we thinking that, it's 2024, things have gotten better. It has not gotten better. When you look at the New York Predator Department and what they've been doing in basically unsealing juvenile records that have been sealed, that they're not supposed to open because they've been sealed, and then giving those sealed records to news media, to private industries, right? To the general public, those in the general public. I'm not making this up. This is what they've been doing. They're breaking the law because they have an agenda that they want to enact. Right? They're still doing unconstitutional stop and frisk, even though that practice was ruled by not only by the New York State Supreme Court, but the United States Supreme Court. That stop and frisk was a violation of the U.S. Constitution against an individual's rights. And they have been doing stop and frisk now more than ever. And on top of that, we have a black mayor. Right? So even when we get in a position of power, we still uphold white supremacy. Because we believe that we're put in there by an act of God. So if you put in that position of power an act of God, and you are continuing the same policies of the white supremacists, then they should tell you who your God favors. And the fact that you have these people in positions of power or positions of authority, and they engage, and that look like us and engage in such behavior, not understanding that if they have a young teenage son or a young son that's a young black man, that he's just as vulnerable to be shot and killed, beaten, arrested, framed, right, by the same mindset that created this system. But we don't think like that because we are conditioned not to think like that. When we receive external stimuli, we selectively map the information into established categories. For example, when we encounter another human being, we might map our perceptions into categories such as age, gender, race, or sexual orientation. The categorization of these perceptions activates cognitive structures called schemas. And from the information or meanings embedded in our schemas, we draw inferences and make predictions about that person. These meanings may include both cognitive beliefs, stereotypes, and affective feelings, prejudices about the groups with which we associate that person. According to psychologists, our respective categories and schemas influence every aspect of our cognition. What information we receive, how that information is classified, how we react to it, and how we remember it. More often than not, these cognitive processes are automatic. They happen almost instantaneously, and whether we want them or not. Research shows that we develop racial meanings, beliefs, and feelings about members of other racial groups. From both direct and vicarious experience, our direct experiences with racial others are generally more influential, but our vicarious experience may be more numerous. Okay, so again, I just want to do a little side note here. Okay, particularly for us as Black people, we must understand certain aspects of psychology. For example, I talk about dark psychological manipulation, the use of psychology in a way that is detrimental to an individual or to a group of people, and again, using covert psychological means as well as covert warfare, right? Covert drugging, setups and frame-ups, honey traps. There are things that are being used against us in which we play a hand in because of our subconscious manipulation that is done to us through covert means. Okay? Such as covert emotional manipulation. Covert emotional manipulation is a part of any form of manipulation. However, it is stronger in people who are known as master manipulators. Now, who are the master manipulators on this planet? Okay? Are people who will manipulate anyone in order to get anything they want. It is not as strong in manipulation tactics people use when they tell someone they are fine even though something is wrong. At the base of manipulation is working to change the way people feel and think, which is covert emotional manipulation. They focus on your conscious awareness in order to control you. Because of this, people don't often realize that they are being manipulated. First, the manipulator will get you to trust them. Then they will start to control the way you feel, think, and perceive situations. This will happen slowly as they don't want you to catch on to the manipulation. Once they feel that your emotions and thoughts are in their hand, they will start to tear apart your confidence. A master manipulator knows they have to lower your self-esteem in order to control you the way they want to. They will also work to take away your identity, which allows you to fully become theirs. And this is one of the tools and methods they use against us. When you look at our young people today, how they're confused about who they are, their identity, their sexuality, right? Who they are, that they are now at a point where wherever the wind blows, that's where they go. With all these terminology, right? They're They're asexual, they're sapiosexual, they're every damn thing except I am a black man, I am a young black boy, I'm a young black girl, I am a black woman. I know myself, I know my history outside of the lies told to us in school about, our history begins in slavery. I know why they enslave us. Okay? It wasn't just for what they told you about just working the land and have you. It's because they couldn't work the land. It is because you had indentured black people from way of Europe that taught them how to work the land. It was because of economics. The system of white supremacy is based on economics and control. Okay? We have to understand the most intricate aspect of why they enslave African people. And particularly where they went. They didn't go to Ethiopia. They didn't go to Liberia. And we saw what happened when they took the enslaved Africans to Haiti. We saw how they fought tooth and nail to keep it a secret that enslaved people of Haiti defeated the French. We saw how they kept out of the history books the numerous rebellions enacted by not only enslaved people, but also white abolitionists. Right? They lied to you about how they became white. The reason why they became white is because Europeans and Africans were united against the wealthy landowners. So everything they do is to manipulate us. Everything they do is to lie to us. Right? And this is just one form. And there are many others. Okay? There are a lot more. Let me take you to this. This is Cognitive Warfare Securing Hearts and Minds. Okay? And again, you look outside the United States if you want to have the truth about certain things. If you want to know the truth about certain things. In cognitive warfare, the weapon is you. Right? Menticide falls under the labeling of cognitive warfare. Right? So again, cognitive warfare is a varied concept encompassing information operations, cyber capabilities, and strategic communication. It is typically defined as the use of the means of action that a state or an influential group makes to manipulate the spontaneous mechanism of the cognition of an enemy or its people in order to weaken, penetrate, influence, or even subdue or destroy it. This includes the use of psychological tactics, information manipulation, and cognitive strategy, narrative, semiotics, iconographies, to influence emotions, beliefs, perception, and behaviors of individual groups or whole population. In essence, cognitive warfare represents a combination of psychological, social, technical warfare, and influence warfare through cyber means. Right? And then there's what is called neurocognitive warfare. Okay? And neurocognitive warfare is something that has been happening, again, over the past 50, 60 years, which involve BCI, brain-computer interface, right? Microchips that are the size of nanometer scale in which the human eye cannot see. It involves drugs for the use of subduing our conscious mind, making us more susceptible to passivity and docileness, but also opens the mind up for what? To be manipulated even more. It involved the use of microwave and radio wave frequency weapons to influence our emotions, our thought patterns, to degrade our skeleton, our organs, our brains, to basically shorten our lifespan. And we don't understand and don't know what is happening until it's too late. So I just want to show you this diagram here, okay, which is the cognitive warfare conceptual relationships. Okay, so all of these, okay, hybrid warfare, economic warfare, military operations. When you look at us here in America, Black people in America, right, what has been done to us is all here. Economic warfare rage on Black people. Cognitive warfare, brain control, the manipulation of our minds. Media warfare, information warfare, media control. Use of stereotypes, creation of certain narrative about Black people that are negative to get other groups of people to view us in that same negative light. Influence operations to influence Black culture or influence Black people into creating negative culture or negative things that is associated with Black culture without them ever truly understand that they're being manipulated. All right, cyber warfare, practical attacks on infrastructure, distributed denial of service attack. So they will attack you online. For example, I started to share the UNESCO website that which you can download the 1964 symposium. All right, it was called The Peopling of Ancient Egypt, in which Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop and Dr. Theophile Obenga prove without a shadow of a doubt that the ancient commands, the ancient Egyptians, the people who founded and built ancient Kemet, what they call ancient Egypt today, were Black. And it's funny, I would say, how is it that when they talk about ancient cultures, right, they refer to these cultures in their ancient name. But when it comes to Egypt, you never hear them say ancient Kemet. Okay? When we know ancient Egypt didn't really begin until the conquest of Alexander the Greek, in which they renamed Kemet Egypt. But they'll talk about the pre-dynastic period, the first dynastic period, the second, the intermediate, the late dynastic period, but they never mentioned the word Kemet. Right? Because basically they wanted to erase Kemet out of our minds. Anything that's associated with Black people and the greatness of Black people, they don't want us to understand and realize who we are, who we were and still are as a people. Okay? All right, so let's get back to the docket, the article here. It's a pretty long article. It's 35 pages. So in many cases, however, the material presented through our vicarious experience is imbalanced in some way. This is particularly true when it comes to crime news reporting. over the last 2 decades, multiple studies have demonstrated that people of color, and African Americans in particular, are overrepresented as predators and underrepresented as victims of crimes in the media. A well-known study of local news programming in Los Angeles during the mid-1990s, for example, found that the media was 22% more likely to show African Americans committing violent crimes than nonviolent crimes, while in reality, they were equally likely to be arrested for both violent crimes and nonviolent crime. White Americans, on the other hand, were 31% more likely to be depicted committing a nonviolent crime than a violent crime, when in fact, they were just 7% more likely to be arrested for a non-violent crime. Studies have also shown that the news media overrepresents the incidence of interracial crime. Not surprisingly, when vicarious experience with racial others are imbalanced, the racial meaning of our schemas become imbalanced. So again, they understand psychology, right? But you have to understand why they're so good at manipulation by knowing who they are as a people. And by understanding that the vast majority of white Americans in America don't come from noble family or even family of well means, when I'm speaking when they came to this country from Britain. But the vast majority of white people that came to this country, right, were people who were the vagabonds, the prisoners, the mentally insane, right? Because they wanted to get rid of those people from English society, and so they kidnapped them, put them on ships, and brought them over here. Okay, so we have to go on. This is how they, again, know us, right? They studied us. They've had zoos that they put us in. They did medical experiments. They did all sorts of experiments on us. Okay. Our experience in this country is not shaped by us. It is shaped by those that are in power, those that this system was meant to protect and to uplift. Okay? As Dr. Emmett Wilson said, the falsification of the African mind. That even as conscious as we may become, without power, without economic power, without educational power in terms of learning the truth about our history, okay, without a level of self-awareness of what is happening to us and what continues to be happening to us, you know, our experiences based off of what the other group who are in position of power, that is based on that. Okay? See, their experience in America is shaped by them. Right? But part of their experience is how they treat us. And that becomes our experience. Their experience is not how we treat them. Right? Understand this. Their experience is how they treat each other. Okay? Gotta think real deep on that one. Until recently, the challenge has been to gauge the content of an individual's person's racial schemas, because most of us are unwilling to admit to or are unaware that we possess racial stereotypes and prejudices. Self-reported attitudes are not helpful. Instead, social psychologists have begun to develop indirect ways to measure racial meanings. The most recent phase of this research has sought to take advantage of the automaticity of bias through what are called reaction time studies. Scientists trigger automatic cognitive processes through subliminal exposure to external stimuli, a technique known as priming, which activates a subject's racial schema without triggering conscious awareness of either the prime or its impact. So what did I just read? It tells you that they can manipulate your subconscious mind without your conscious mind ever realizing that it's being manipulated, that you are being manipulated. And they know this. They know this. They practice this, particularly within the predator police department all across America. When you see people confessing to crimes they didn't commit. And guess what? They do this to our children. Right? How many black people who have went into the penal system, right, have come out without being psychologically manipulated or brainwashed? Subjects are then asked to perform a task. When the prime and the task are consistent with the subject's schema, the subject's response time is faster. When they are inconsistent, it is slower. The time differential observed are viewed as measurements of an individual implicit bias. A series of studies researchers at the University of Chicago conducted over the last decade are illustrative. In these experiments, researchers asked subjects to distinguish between computerized images of guns and hand tools. Just before each subject appeared, a human face appeared on the screen. In some instances, the faces were black. In others, it was white. There were two versions of the experiment. In one, participants were allowed to respond to the subject at their own pace. In the other, they had to respond to each subject within half a second. The results were troubling. In the self-paced version, participants detected guns faster in the presence of a black face, and in the split-second version, participants falsely identified guns more often when the face was black than when it was white. You know, it's interesting because more white people own guns in America. As a matter of fact, they own multiple guns compared to the black population and to the amount of black people that own guns, whether it be legal or illegally. Right? But propaganda, psychological manipulation not only affects black people, but it also affects non-black people as well. And, you know, that includes white people, because they're the ones that are creating these propaganda against who? Against black people. This is why they can get Asians to come in and think that they're white, right? And Chinese, for a matter of fact, too. As I tell you, right? China is America's biggest adversary today. And what does the white racist conservative do? Use Chinese people, right, to engage in tearing down some of the civil rights gain to black people that benefit them as well. And now what we see now, we see less and less Asians now are getting into these elite schools. But because America has a way of manipulating other people, particularly against black people, is why they do it. Unbelievable. All right. So researchers conclude that participant response time was faster because the blackface prime condition and the gun was consistent with subjects' existing racial schemas and drew upon their stereotypes about blacks and gun possessions. Perhaps more notable was the fact that when forced to make a snap judgment, the subjects stereotypic association between race and violence caused them to misperceive weapons where there was none. Studies like this one have evolved into an entire industry devoted to measuring implicit bias, and a prototype called the Implicit Association Test, the IAT, right? Not surprisingly, the IAT, along with a host of other tests, have repeatedly documented varying degrees of implicit bias against African Americans, Latinos, Asians, and non-Americans. This implicit bias, in turn, has had a demonstrable effect on performance, judgment, and treatment of others. Significantly, recent studies have documented implicit bias not only amongst members of the general public, but also among police officers, probation officers, prosecutors, capital defense attorneys, and federal magistrate judge who help to administer our justice system. Now, I'm going to pause on this because, again, knowing what I know and know what you should know also. Again, there is no implicit bias when it comes to police officers, judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys, or what have you. Now, why do I say this? We see in hidden Facebook groups white police officers claiming about engaging in warfare against black people, calling us monkeys. Can't wait to lay that N-word on the ground, right? Constant negative caricatures by police officers. That's not implicit bias. How is that implicit bias? When we see district attorneys covering up information that can exonerate a person that is on trial for a crime that he did not commit or she did not commit, and the district attorneys have the evidence to show that this person did not commit the crime, what do? They don't give that information to the defense. They don't bring it up. They hide it. I'm not saying this just to say it. Go and Google it. You'll see how many times there's, even now, where you had a district attorney that was sued because he sent innocent people to jail knowing that they were innocent. So don't talk to me about implicit bias. There's no such thing as implicit bias. This is just, again, our way, our white people way of creating such term to make them feel better. Because this is the psychopathic mindset and sociopathic mindset that they have. And we see it explicitly within the predator department, predator law enforcement department all across America. That whenever they kill an unarmed black person, whenever they violate black people's civil rights, and they get sued, what is it that they say? That they are not responsible, therefore they cannot be held accountable for the actions of the predator officers on the force. Right? But again, here's a law enforcement agency within the United States that will hold an innocent person accountable when they know that that person didn't commit the crime. But yet when they do crimes, right, they get away with saying that they hold no responsibility. And we wonder why these police officers behave the way they do. Because they're in a corrupt system. And they therefore are corrupted themselves, the vast majority. So when they want to tell you a few bad apples spoil the bunch, no, the bunch is bad. Okay? It should be the few good apple that's in the bad bunch. How do we keep them good? Right? And what do we have to do? What do you do? You have to remove them. So either they end up leaving, because again, if they whistleblow, they get their lives destroyed. Right? or they have to team up with other good cops to form a barrier against the bad cops and get them off, get the bad cops off the force, right? And increase the number of good cops within the department or the agencies. But they can't do that because the corruption is embedded. It is deeply embedded, and they only promote corrupt police officers. We see what happens when they hire black cops and to be the commander or to be the the chief of the police department, and those black cops who are intent on changing the corrupt culture, they fire them. Right? They will put a black face temporarily to do what? What's called emotional manipulation. Right? To tamper, not to tamper, but to temper our outrage, our anger. So you got to understand how to play these games. Because if we don't, like I said, things are not getting better. It's getting worse. And the reason why I'm doing this is to show you guys that, they've always targeted our kids, including us when we were children. And if you have kids today, they're probably targeting your kids already, or your kids are going to be targeted. So how do we protect the next generation of young black boys and girls? Right? We need to have knowledge and understanding. Right? We need to stand up for our young people. Correct them when we see they do something wrong. Stop being afraid of our own children. How is it that these white people can get us to become so afraid of our own children? Right? Based on what they have done. Based on the laws that they have put on the books. The fact that now you have black children will tell their parents, I'll call the cops on you. They're weaponizing our kids against us, and we against them. And we against each other. Cognitive warfare. Cognitive warfare. These cognitive processes are especially susceptible to several features of American social wars. First, actors in social wars consistently rely on negative portrayal of the enemy. Researchers link these reliance to the formation of and frequent reliance upon negative stereotypes. Second, this strategic employment of war rhetoric increases aggression and hostility towards social outgroups. Finally, social war promotes a Manichean mindset, a good versus evil diametrics, which increases support for harsher punishment. By all accounts, the politics, rhetoric, and imaginary epidemic, and sorry, let me read this again. By all accounts, the politics, rhetoric, and imagery endemic to the super predator war was extreme in its demonization and adultification of adolescent offenders. Professors Elizabeth Scott and Lauren Steinberg deemed the 1980s and 1990s an era of moral panic about juvenile crime, marked by an exaggeration of the threat adolescent offenders posed and collective hostility towards this group. Politicians and the media were both complicit. As part 2 detail, network and cable television stories portraying adolescents gangbangers, magazine covers lamenting the moral deterioration of America's youth, and not America's youth, black youths, okay? And politicians trumpeting laws like Proposition 21 and the Federal Violent and Repeat Juvenile Offenders Act created a veritable onslaught of information that both implicitly and explicitly link adolescents and African American adolescents in particular with violent crime. Right? How many of you know the name Peter Bergen? Peter Bergen is an American psychologist who in the 1970s and also in the 1990s brought to the attention of Congress of what the neuroscientists, psychologists, and psychiatrists were engaging in, particularly against young black children. And what is called the Violent Initiative, in which they were looking into the DNA of black boys in particular, looking for DNA markers that says that black children are more susceptible to crime. Like I said, white children commit mass murder, mass shooting, mass killing, white young men, middle-aged white men, right? But there is no violent initiative against that type of killing. They're not taking the DNA samples of young poor white boys, right? Or the white supremacist white men and women and boys to look into, to say, why are they so bent on this, white supremacy? Because we know the vast majority of white people in America are white supremacists. Okay? And I have no problem saying that because it's the truth. Right? They love to do some symbolism, symbolic shit, because they understand how we are conditioned as black people. They come amongst us, they offer civil rights, but when it comes to equal economic rights, they're against. When it comes to reparations for black Americans of this black American descendants of enslaved Africans, right? They don't support that. When it comes to expanding the certain types of social welfare programs that will benefit not only them the most, but will also help black people, right? They're against it. Listen to what I'm saying. They are against social programs that will benefit them greatly. But if it also benefits black people, they don't support it. Again, I'm not saying that. Go do your research. Look it up. Okay? One study from the height of the super predator frenzy show that shows the impact of these influenced particularly well in 1998 political scientists Frank Gilliam and Shanto Iyengar designed an experiment to test the impact of a crime news script. They created 4 separate versions of a fictitious local newscast that contained a short crime segment in the middle. Before the more than 2,000 participants saw the videotape, the researchers asked them to complete a short questionnaire soliciting information about their economic and social backgrounds, their political beliefs, and their customary media habits. They were then divided into 4 groups. Some participants watched a story in which the alleged perpetrators of a murder was an African American male. Other subjects were given the same news report, but feature a white male as the murder suspect. The third group of participants watched the news report edited to exclude information concerning the identity of the perpetrator. A fourth control group saw no crime news at all. The participants were then asked to complete a second, longer questionnaire with that probe their attitudes towards crime and punishment. The results were astonishing. More than 60% of those who watched the crime report with no reference to a perpetrator falsely recall seeing one. And of those, 70% identified the perpetrator as African American. White participants who saw the version of the African American subject exhibited an increased tendency to attribute crime to individual failings and increase negative attitudes towards African Americans that exceeded the increases observed in those who saw the version with the white suspect. They also exhibit a statistical significant 6% increase in levels of support for punitive crime policies and more than 10% increase in levels of what Gilliam and Iyengar referred to as new, hidden, or covert racism. Okay? I'm not making these terms up. Second, and perhaps more obvious, is the influence of cognitive processes on war rhetoric, which implicitly casts the target as un-American and exasperates in-group, out-group hostility. Because war is generally associated with international conflict, it naturally evokes concept of national identity. In doing so, war rhetoric subtly tend to conflate the purpose in-group with Americanism and implicitly portray the proposed out-group as un-American. This is particularly important in light of implicit bias research that suggests that Americans of color, including African Americans, are less easily associated with American than are European Americans. Exposure to nationalistic symbol has also been found to influence levels of aggression and hostility. In one recent study, researchers subliminally exposed participants to images of the American flag. They were then asked to complete word fragments. Those primed with the flag completed the fragment more often with aggression and war-related words than those who were not exposed. They also were more prone to display hostile behavior in response to a mild computer-based provocation. Interestingly, researchers observed these effects only for those participants who were exposed to high level of national news. Although research have not yet been done on social war rhetoric, race, and the punishment of adolescent offenders, the implications are obvious. Perhaps the most unique aspect of social war is their ability to mobilize issues. Once war is declared, the target changes from the problem in search of a solution to a question of moral superiority between two positions. And again, we see that also with religion, with religious people claiming to be more morally superior than non-religious people, despite the reality is that those who claim to be religious, whether it be Christian, Muslims, right, Judaism or Jews, exhibit the most immoral, not exhibit, but have done the most immoral acts in history up until today. All right, the vast majority of the prisons are filled with people who identify themselves as Christians or other religious groups. Okay? But it's interesting how, again, religion is also used to blind one's mind from the reality, where you say one thing, but your action is the opposite. Right? But again, that's all part of cognitive warfare, where you are indoctrinated, you are brainwashed into a belief system, right, that doesn't suit or promote any sort of critical thinking, any sense of looking at the world in a more logical and realistic way. And so you operate through your subconscious mind, automatically doing the opposite of what you say your religion is supposed to promote. Okay? Consider the title of one of the most controversial texts from the 1990s, Body Count, Moral Poverty, and How to Win America's War Against Crime and Drugs. On the body count's formulation, drug addiction is not an affliction, but a moral choice. By framing the conduct of the proposed out-group as an attack on the moral fiber of society, the proposed in-group can claim moral superiority in a form of self-defense, and immorality is imputed on the out-group as the aggressor. The result is a classic Manichaean worldview. Good raging war against evil. It follows then that a group that views itself as morally superior to another group is more willing to engage in violent or punitive acts against that group. What is more surprising is the fact that this moral diametric affects not just those who evaluate a targeted cohort from a distance, that everyday consumer of the nightly news, for example, but also those whose job it is to decide how harshly to punish individual members of that cohort. Two studies of decision making by juvenile justice practitioners bear this out. They will poignantly illustrate how race seems to inform judgment about an individual's relative morality. In 1999, in an attempt to determine why African American youth in 3 Washington state counties were receiving harsher sentencing recommended than white youths charged with the same crimes, sociologists George Bridge and Sarah Steen conducted a comprehensive analysis of 232 narrative reports that county probation officers wrote. After controlling for factors such as age, gender, and offense history, Bridges and Steen observed that officers' written rationales for sentencing recommendation indicate that they were more likely to attribute criminal behavior of minority youth to internal forces such as personal failure, inadequate moral character and personality, and the criminal behavior of white youth to external forces such as poor home life, lack of appropriate role model, and environments, even when objective risk factors associated with the youths were similar. The officers were also more likely to have a negative reaction to African American youth when assessing objective factors like levels of remorse or cooperativeness, and conclude that only state intervention could change their delinquent behavior. To illustrate their point, Bridges and Steen compare the matter in which one probation officer depicts 2 17-year-old boys, Ed and Lou. Neither had a criminal history, and both were charged with first-degree robbery. Ed, however, was African American while Lou was white. This robbery was very dangerous as Ed confronted the victim with a loaded shotgun. He pointed at the victim and demanded money be placed in the paper bag. There is an adult quality to this referral. In talking with Ed, what was evident was the relaxed and open way he discussed his lifestyle. There didn't seem to be any desire to change. There was no expression of remorse from the young man. There was no moral content to his comment. Lou is the victim of a broken home. He is trying to be his own man, but it seemingly easily misled and follows other delinquents against his better judgment. Lou is a tall, emaciated little boy who is terrified by his present predicament. It appears that he is in need of drug, alcohol evaluation, and treatment. But I'll go a step further. We see that when black men and black boys are arrested for a criminal offense or any form of criminal accusation, that the officers will list other crimes which have no bearing to what these black men and black boys were arrested for. Okay? I've had that experience, right? In way they will put a litany of other offenses onto your charges because they can, right? And this is New York. So like I said, New York is one of the most racist states. And I don't got to say it. I can prove it. I can prove it. In 2004, Professor Sandra Graham and Brian Lowry expanded on elements of Bridges and Steen research. The participants include a racially diverse and gender balanced group of 91 juvenile probation officers in Los Angeles. Members of Experiment 1, police officers were first asked to perform what the research called a mind clearing task, which required them to track a string of letters on a rapidly flashing computer screen. Amidst the flashing letters, however, certain officers were subliminally exposed to words commonly associated with African Americans, such as black, homeboy, rap, etc., while others were exposed to race-neutral words. The researchers then asked participants to read 2 vignettes about a hypothetical adolescent who allegedly commit either a property crime or an assault. In both, the race of the offender was left unstated and the scenario were ambiguous about the cause of the crime. After reading the vignettes, the probation officers rated the offender on various personal traits such as hostility and immaturity and made judgment about the offender's culpability, expected recidivism, and deserved punishment. In contrast, the subject who did not receive the racial priming, the probation officers who were exposed to the subliminal messaging judged the alleged offender to be less immature and more violent, more culpable, more likely to reoffend, and more deserving of punishment. And their global trait ratings were more negative. Amazingly, the results were consistent even among officers who self-reported and likely believed that they held no racial bias towards minority. Taken together, these experiments tell us several important things. First, they reveal that even those whom we might assume to be immune to racial primes and stereotypes linking young black males with criminality, abnormality, and adultness, the police and probation officers whose job it is to provide professional assessment of adolescent offenders on a daily basis are not. Indeed, while the rhetoric of the super predator war might have influenced them less than members of the general public by virtue of their professional training, it's likely affected them nonetheless. Second is the apparent extent to which even subliminal racial primes can influence our perception of individuals. That the mere evocation of terms associated with African Americans could trigger assumptions about the relative culpability of an individual offender is stunning. Third, and perhaps most notably, is the degree to which race aligns with perceived immorality in the collective subconscious of these decision makers, and the evidence suggested in our collective American subconscious. Young black males are often associated with adult qualities, little desire to change, no remorse, and no moral content. We perceive them as less immature, more violent, more culpable, more likely to reoffend, and more deserving of punishment than their white counterparts. While these associations may also be the product of the history of race relations in the country, strategic policy, and crime rates, insomuch as they are the product of super predator war. We cannot ignore the role of the super predator war and social war in general in shaping our social cognition. Right? It's important to understand these things. Right? The mindset. So when we see again the flux of white men and women who will call the police on black men and women and even young children, who are engaging in everyday activity that they themselves engage in, non-criminal, I might ask, they're calling the police. Okay? So, like I said, to me, there's no such thing as implicit bias in terms of when it comes to white people. All right? They know what they're doing. You know, like I said, we like to give white people an out when it comes to their racial discrimination against us. Why is that? Again, because of what we have, and which is, again, Anglophilia. Right? We have a love of whiteness, of anything European. This is why we post on our, particularly our women, post on Facebook, Paris, the city of love. A lot of them traveling over to Europe by themselves. Now we see how Europeans are treating them. They're hostile towards them. They're assaulting them. Right? Because in their mind, they think it's totally acceptable to be traveling overseas on their own because they're black women, right? And, hey, the white man, they're so in love with white Jesus that, they become the bed wrenches for these white racists. All right? This is what the psychological conditioning in our people have done. This is what the psychological conditioning of society have done to black people, particularly to our black youths. We always got to remember that we were young once. That what they're going through, we have been through. And if we don't bring it to their attention, if we don't say anything, if we turn our backs, if we shy away, this is exactly what they want to happen. This is exactly what they want to happen. They know it is important that black people, particularly black children, have positive black role models. This is why they take the black male teachers out of the universities, out of the schools, the public schools. But they also know that black women are easily manipulated by white women and white men. And because the white media and white society have propped up black women as being the most educated, the most this, that, the most entrepreneurs. But again, it's a feel-good rhetoric with no meat on the plate to substantiate anything that is satisfying in reality. Social media, again, I've talked about this in cognitive warfare, how social media is used to condition us to perceive things in an unrealistic manner. And what it does is also, like religion, is to create a narcissistic mindset in the minds of those that consume those products, whether it be religion, the Bible, whether it be social media, the lies that are being told. And you will see, when you see on social media, you see black women who are very successful, right? The people who are teaching them ultimately is white men. And then they develop the same predatory mindset and prey on poor, vulnerable black women. All right? Or you'll see the black men who are engaging in this rhetoric about, giving your woman your paycheck, and, you shouldn't be coming to her unless, you give her $50,000, what have you. And we see how black women are soaking these things up, and they are making those men wealthy. And those men aren't doing nothing for them. They're making those men wealthy, and those men who have wives or what have you, they're making them wealthy because they've learned how to prey on the gullibility, right? On the conditioned mindset of black women. Right? And then we come to the single mother household, right? In which the majority of young black children are living in. And you look within those. Highest rate of incarceration, highest rate of illiteracy, highest rate of STDs, right? Highest rate of mental illness. And we just ignore these things. Right? With no concern, no care, none whatsoever. We have to get and we have to raise our level of consciousness, both black men and black women. And we have to start thinking about the future of our children, because it's going to be too late, and there's going to be no way in which we are the future black young men and black women will climb their way out of. And then they will look back at us and say that we failed them. Okay? So let me just read the conclusion. All right, conclusion. The rest of the Western world was not immune from the spike in adolescent crime. The political posturing, the public outcry, and the shift in penal ideology that impacted the United States during the late 1980s and 1990s, yet no other country in the Western world turned so abruptly and completely on its population of adolescent lawbreakers. Plainly, there are important historical, sociological, political, and demographic differences between the United States and other Western nations that influence the relative severity of their juvenile justice policies. But this article argues that there are also something about the social psychology of these metaphorical social wars in which our country has been so continually and steadily involved. In the case of the super predator war, these cognitive processes and reverberations have so indelibly altered the meaning of young black male within our society, and we are immune to the notion that we are systematically destroying a significant portion of our country's future. Okay? So again, we have to read more articles like this, more research like this, right? But we also have to read up about psychology. Why? Because again, understanding psychology, right, will help us to understand our own self, will help us to help shape our children into the young men and women that we want them to be. But we have to be on the same code, black men and black women. But understand, as black men, we are fighting a battle, not just for ourselves and within ourselves, but for our children and for our women who have been so manipulated by this system that they think it is better to struggle by themselves as opposed to getting therapy along with the men in their lives, whether it be their husband, their boyfriends, their baby fathers, what have you. Right? And work on rectifying some of the issues, because what you will find is that a lot of issues are being ignored. And that too many of our women are indulging in fantasy and what they see on television and on social media and wanting to live that particular kind of lifestyle and expect you to give them that lifestyle when you can't. And without them realizing that there's only a very small percentage of people who are living those lifestyles. And so they are taking out personal loans, putting themselves in debt so that they can at least look as if they're part of that society. Okay? And the churches must be held responsible, particularly the black church, must also be held responsible for what they have done to the black community. They themselves are being used as tools. when they're not reaching out to young people, right? When you have police officers who belong in certain churches and who are trying to use their authority to punish young children because they believe God gives them the authority in the position that they're in, right? Just like the white supremacists on the police force to dole out God's justice. So they don't even see themselves in the young people that they are brutalizing, that they're arresting. All they're about is what? Pursuing their careers, right? Trying to get to the high position. And so they prey on the very young people that look like them when those officers were the same age, that look like their children of the same age or close to age. And yet they never come to the understanding that, hey, you know, what happened if my son meet a white racist on the police force or a black Sambo on the police force who brutalize him, who will kill him, who will incarcerate him, who will set him up, frame him? They never seem to have that way of thinking. And I understand my brothers on the force that, you know, that training, that conditioning, it takes away your ability to identify with your people and your community that you grew up in. And that you see us with the same minded eye as the white racist does. But it's funny how when you're in uniform and white police officers beat your asses, all of a sudden now you're not bleeding blue anymore, you bleeding black. And you want support from the black community. It's funny how that works. Right? It's funny when you see them trying to manipulate you into not pressing charges and, you know, all of a sudden, you know, it's brotherly love. It's funny when they pass you over for a promotion, right? Because you're black. Simple as that. Right? And you still go out there and now you want to work extra hard, so you start planting drugs in young black people. You start arresting them for crimes they didn't do. Understand how you yourself are being corrupted. All right? It's within us to make the change. Okay? What's more important? Moving us together as one people, one nation, united, or the few individuals that being put in positions of power that don't do shit? Right? Like the Sambos and Sambinas that are in the position of power. And not all of them, right? I'm just talking about those who are Sambos and Sambinas. There are black politicians out there who's actually trying to do something. And for that, they should be commended. Right? But we have to start voting with an intelligent mind. Not one that's going to pick a candidate because he's black or she's black. Not one's going to pick a candidate because they get on television, on the radio, and they bring hot sauce. And that's all we talk about. Like a bunch of idiots. Right? Not one who goes on television and plays saxophone. So we think he's cool. Right? When he corrupted the highest office. And see, that's the thing. We as black people, we tell each other, oh, you got to be perfect like Jesus. But yet white people will elect their most vile people into the highest office of the land. Okay? But meanwhile, we here thinking that we're morally superior. We're not morally superior. We're morally stupid. Okay? We rather vote for a white supremacist than a black person who may not be Christian. Right? But have the heart and the mind and the ability, right, to do things for us. But we won't vote for them. Just like the black Sambos in California that voted against reparation Why? They don't want to give you money because they see that you are moving away from the bullshit of Christianity, of the religion. They see that you are moving away from that. So they rather you have nothing because you're giving the racists back their white Jesus. All right. Anyway, that's the topic for another video. And that's the conclusion of this video. This is part 2 of cognitive warfare of black men in America.